Here we have helper segment data code. Let's break down each part of the code and explain its functionality. Function trainIDX, valIDX, testIDX is equal to helperSegmentData numsets. This line defines a MATLAB function named helperSegmentData that takes one input argument numsets and returns three output arguments trainIDX, valIDX, and testIDX. %80% train, 10% validation, 10% test. Props is equal to 0.80.10.1. This comment indicates the proportions of the dataset to allocate for training, validation, and testing. In this case, 80% of the data will be used for training, 10% for validation, and 10% for testing. These proportions are stored in the props array. Training samples. TrainIDX is equal to rand sample, numsets, floor, props, 1 asterisk numsets. This line randomly selects indices for training samples using the randSample function. It selects a number of samples equal to 80% of numsets, the total number of samples. Get remaining samples. valTestIDX is equal to setDiff, 1 numsets, trainIDX. This line identifies the remaining samples, not used for training, by finding the set difference between all indices, 1 numsets, and the training indices. Validation samples. valIDX is equal to randSample, valTestIDX, floor, props, 2 asterisk numsets. This line randomly selects indices for validation samples from the remaining samples after removing the training samples. It selects a number of samples equal to 10% of numsets. Remaining samples for test. TestIDX is equal to setDiff, valTestIDX, valIDX. This line identifies the remaining samples, not used for training or validation, by finding the set difference between the remaining samples and the validation indices. End comment marks the end of the function definition. In summary, the helperSegmentData function segments a dataset into training, validation, and testing sets based on the specified proportions. It randomly selects indices for each set and returns these indices as output. This segmentation is useful for training and evaluating machine learning models on separate sets of data.